I don't hear you. Are you talking? You saying something? I don't hear anything. I hear a buzzing noise. I think we need to totally restart. No clue what you said, but total restart. Can anyone hear me? Can anyone hear me? Is this working? I got a, I got a buzzy noise, Chris. Oh, it looks like this is actually working. Maybe. I'm going to start. We'll see what happens. All right, folks. Well, today we were going to talk about changing fisheries on the Chesapeake. I'm getting a text. I'm going to check it just to see if we can make this actually work. Nope, all about yellow perch. Great yellow perch bite going on right now. If you have the chance to go yellow perch fishing, absolutely positively take it. Don't sit here listening to me yak. The perch are off the hook, people. Last couple days with this warm weather, they've gone absolutely crazy. I've got multiple reports of big, big, big catches. All the hot spots will be in the weekly reports. Check them out. Tomorrow by noon, they'll be up online, as you know. All right, so anyway, we are here tonight to talk about changing fisheries of the Chesapeake. And you can see this picture right here is pretty old. You know how you can tell? Look at my beard. It isn't gray. That tells you something right there. Pretty old. This is from about 10 years ago. And this was an average fall fish, 32, 34 incher. Not at all unusual to catch, right? Pretty normal. Chris, go ahead and take me to the next slide, assuming you can hear me here. Oh my gosh, you can hear me. Awesome. So this is last fall. And this was kind of your nice fish last fall, 24 incher. Quite a difference in size. And, the change happened so slowly that I sort of didn't even notice. But then a reader sent in a chart, a table that was by the Chesapeake Biological Laboratory, a reputable source, that listed out the different weights for different size rockfish. And I'm looking at this table and I'm like, that's just not right. And he sent it to me because it just didn't seem right to him. And all the fish were listed as being much bigger. This 24-inch fish was like 6 pounds, something crazy like that, that it clearly is not. And it occurred to me that, you know what? The rockfish are not only have they become, lesser in numbers, they're shrinking. The average fish is just plain shrinking, or has shrunk. This past fall, 30-inch plus fish was relatively rare on the middle Chesapeake. I mean, it happened. You caught some. We caught a few on my boat, not a lot. I don't think we ever broke 32 inches on my boat. And the vast majority of the fish were these 24 inchers, 25 inchers, not the big 30-plus inch fish that we really should have late in the fall. So what's going on there? Excuse me. We could point to the lack of forage fish, menhaden issues. We could point to water quality. We could point to the summers being hotter and hotter. There are a lot of things you can point to. Bottom line, I'm not a scientist, and I'm not going to pretend to be. I'm not going to tell you I know why. But what I have observed that in this striped bass fishery in the Chesapeake Bay is that not only are they becoming a little harder to find, they're becoming smaller. It's absolutely happening. All right, Chris, take us on to the next changing fishery, would you please? Here's a cobia. Oh, and I forgot to say, I'm sorry, folks. If you have any questions, plug them right into the comments. Chris will relay them to me. Hopefully, despite our recent technical disaster, and hopefully he'll still manage to get the questions across to me. But feel free to pop them in there as they come to mind. All right, so cobia. This is a picture taken out of Cape Charles. We took my boat down there a while back and had a great day, Caught some nice cobia, obviously. And the weird thing is, historically, you always heard about cobia being caught in the bay. I remember when I was a kid, every year when everyone chummed at the hill in the fall. Every year, somebody would catch a cobia, and it'd be big news. Oh, cool, someone caught a cobia, but it happened, right? Now, take us on to the next slide, please, Chris. Now, if you want to target cobia, you don't have to go to Cape Charles. You don't have to go to Virginia. There are times when the bite is certainly better in Virginia waters, but there were times this year. When the cobia bite was better in the waters off Salmons than it was pretty much anywhere in the Virginia portion of the bay. That is a change. That's different. That's unusual. That didn't used to happen. And there were enough cobia at certain times of the summer, every few years, where you might actually be able to go target them and catch a few. But it's become a regular thing, all the way up off of Salmons. So that's pretty darn cool. But it's definitely a change in the fishery. All right, Chris, go on and take us to the next, please. Specks. These specks are middle bay specks caught in November. This was at the power plant. I'm sure most of y'all have heard that folks get specks and some puppy drum in the waters there in the fall. And the really weird thing though is years ago, I'm going back. I'm going to say I was in my 20s. The chop tank had a really decent speck fishery. It's reliable, good fishery. That kind of petered out. The chop tank, the mouth of the chop tank, had a speck fishery this year through the summer. Some showed up as far up as the Severn, and it's not uncommon for that to happen, but they do seem to be in different numbers in different places farther north now than they used to reliably be. What is it? Is it climate change? Is it water quality conditions? I don't know. I'm not the scientist, but I do know that whereas 20 years ago you could run to the chop tank and target them. 30 years ago, you could run to the chop tank and target them. 20 years ago, you couldn't, and you really couldn't target them north of the Tangier. Now you can, and they're moving around, they're shifting. We've had incredible speck runs off the mouth of the West River within the last 5 years. Didn't happen last year. There were a few around, but it wasn't what I call a run. But we could go out and target them. We catch 5-6 specks in a day, several different seasons in the last 5 years. So it's pretty incredible stuff. Chris, and we've got a question. If and when a third bridge crossing is built, do you see that changing anything? Luke, heck yeah. Heck yeah, it'll change a lot. Now, it'll depend on where the bridge is built, that bottom line. And right now, it looks like most likely it'll be near the other bridges. So it might not be a huge change, but it will change things. You can bet on it. That amount of structure, absolutely. Chris, you want to go ahead and take us on to the next one here? What do we got here? The Spanish mackerel. So look, here's another fish that historically 1 out of every 3 or 4 years they come up the bay as far as the Bay Bridge in numbers high enough to target them. Now you could depend on that being in years of high salinity. This is where the Spanish mackerel fishery has changed. We've had many years in a row now of relatively low salinity. And the macs are still coming way up the bay. This year was not incredibly low salinity. It was kind of average-ish. But I heard of a Spanish mackerel caught all the way up at 7-foot knoll. And there was a good fishery between the bridge and the mouth of the Severn. Oh, gosh, better part of a month. Excuse me. And they were, right off the mouth of the Severn for the better part of a month. So this has been going on for several years now. It is definitely a changing fishery, whereas they used to be, once every 5 years, maybe once every 3 years. Now it seems like every season we're getting that mackerel run. We're getting it farther north than you could have planned on it. 10 years ago you could have planned on it, oh gosh, call it Point Lookout south, mouth of the Packs south. Nowadays, you can plan on it happening right off Annapolis. So interesting change. Now, again, I'm not the scientist guy, right? But I am going to point to one really evident change that I think maybe is linked. And that is that, when I was a kid and you saw a shoal of bait out in the middle of the bay in August, it was going to be bunker. almost certainly. And it wouldn't be measured by, oh, it's the size of a house. No, you'd be like, oh, it was like 5 acres, or oh, it was like 30 acres. We had much bigger schools of bunker back then. Of course, that's what the rockfish like to chew on. These mackerel are not real hip to chasing after the bunker. They're a little big for them. They like really little baits. They like bay anchovies. Now, these days, when you see a big shoal of bait in the bay, what's it likely to be? In the middle bay, I should say, middle and upper bay. You're probably looking at bay anchovies. You see them a lot more now. And is that linked? I don't know. You tell me. All right, Chris, take us on to the next one here. Here we have a black sea bass. Now, this is another fish that, depending on the salinity, you could really find anywhere in the bay. I've caught these off Thomas Point Shoal at the Bay Bridge, and I'm talking in years past, not just this very last year, which was an unusual year for them. Here's what was different. There were keeper bass being caught in the bay. My entire life, you could depend on being able to find black sea bass, let's say, from Point Lookout to the Bay Bridge, somewhere in that zone, any given year. You really could. If you looked for them, if you poked and prodded, you could find them. You never found a keeper. It just didn't happen. And I can recall days, particularly if you fished wrecks down in the Point Lookout zone, the Patuxent zone, you could catch 30, 40, 50 black sea bass. And no, you were never going to catch a keeper. This fall, people were catching keepers. So it's a really interesting new prospect for us. Hopefully it'll happen again next year. All right, Chris, take us on to the next, please. Here we have a redfish. This is in Ramsey Lake. This is last summer. We caught a bunch of these guys, little guys. There were some keeper reds being caught by the end of the year. Not many, but a few. And it seems like a really foreign fish to a lot of folks in the Middle Bay. In reality, these fish stage like a once in every 5-year appearance, and that goes back historically. You can find evidence of it. It's not really a hard thing to verify. Now, I have been told by the scientifical types that what happens is these baby reds get caught in the oceanic current and swept up into the bay, and it's a fairly regular, again, once every 5-7 years kind of occurrence. And when it happens, that's why the reds are here. It's not so much a matter of these fish attempting to be somewhere else, right? Of course, we have the big reds down in the Middle Bay, completely different fish, completely different fishery. That's a whole different stock of fish. But what's interesting here, and why I bring this up in the changing fishery context, is that in the last 10 years, this has happened 3 times. We've had these reds. Not in the numbers we had last year. Last year we had really good numbers. But about 4 years prior to that, and then about 3 years prior to that, it also happened. It's more often than it used to be. Is it changing ocean currents? Is it the fish doing something different? I don't know. But something's going on there. All right, Chris, take us on to the next, please. Here we have a black drum, completely different fish, right? This was last summer. This is in the Choptank River. This was a thrilling catch, I got to tell you, people, because it hit a jig. And you don't catch drum like this on jigs all that often. Usually it's a bait game. Here's what's weird. Here's what's weird. Man, as far back as I can go back, I can go back 3 of my dad's boats to when he had a 26-foot Apollo, and we used to run it from Bodkin Creek to the Stone Rock. From the second week of May to the second week of June, that was the window, there was a black drum run at the Stone Rock. It was as reliable as a clock. Running on 4 or 5 years now, just hasn't happened. And I know for sure the last 2 seasons, I've dedicated at least 3 days each year to going to the Stone Rock and looking for these fish in late May, early June. And I haven't seen one yet. Haven't seen one yet. This was a early to mid-June fish, but it was up the Choptank. Why did they change their pattern? That pattern is way historic. It goes back before my time, before your time. They always used to show up at the Stone Rock. You can find copies of Fishing in Maryland from the 1970s, and they will talk about the drum run at the Stone Rock. This was as reliable as it gets, and it seems to have just plain stopped. I don't know why. No clue. No clue why. But obviously, these fish haven't stopped coming to the area. The day that I caught this fish, I watched some folks on they were anchored up on a scout. I watched them hook 3 and catch 2. They were fishing bait, and they were getting slammed by them. This is in the space of an hour or two. The fish are there. Why are they not at the Stone Rock? I cannot imagine. If anybody has an idea, please plug it into the comments box, because I would sure as heck like to know why. All right, Chris, take us on to the next one here, please. What do we got here? We got a pompano. I kind of cheated on this picture. This is a picture of a pompano in the surf. This is in the late fall on Chesapeake. And truth be told, you've always been able to catch pompano, never in big numbers, but if you fished for them, you get 1 or 2 on a good day fishing in the surf at Chesapeake late in the year. What's weird is the state of Maryland now has a Chesapeake Bay record for pompano. Everybody might remember last year it was set by someone fishing I'm sorry, let me get this straight. 2 years ago, it was set by someone fishing, interestingly, at the Stone Rock. And then last year, it was beaten by someone fishing from shore on Tillman Island. And they caught like 2 or 3 that day. We're getting constant reports now of them popping up in pound nets. Remember, the fish's full name is Florida pompano. Of course, that doesn't mean it's limited to Florida. Of course, you've always caught them in the Carolinas. But to have them actually coming up into the Chesapeake, the middle Chesapeake, is pretty darn wacky. Pretty darn wacky. What's going on? I have no idea. But if you want to engage in a completely new, really cool fishery, also bait down to the Stone Rock and fish for pompano. Grab some sand fleas. That'd be pretty darn cool to catch one of these guys in the bay. All right, Chris, take us on to the next one here, please.
Hey, Lenny, can you hear me?
Oh, I can hear you. Finally, right. We're getting over our technical disaster.
All it takes sometimes is a little Control-Alt-Delete,
I
just
couldn't hear your voice, Chris.
Yeah, I just want to stop you before we move to the next slide, because we've got a few questions that I thought you might want to just go to.
Please, toss them on in there.
All right.
Hey, Kevin. Does the switch from fork length to pinch tail length have anything to do with the apparent shrinkage of rockfish? Kevin, actually, the truth of the matter is, when you get outside of the Chesapeake, everybody goes by fork length. Generally, the laws allow you to pinch the tail, because otherwise it just causes all types of regulatory confusion. Right? Because if you have a legal size limit of a fork length on a rockfish, you know what's going to happen. The first time a guy gets pulled over by the DNR, they're going to pinch a tail and be like, look, it's 20 inches. It's purely a matter of regulatory confusion. And so the DNR guy can pull up next to the boat and pinch the tail and go, look, there ain't no way it's 20 inches, or yeah, it's definitely 20 inches. And in fact, once you get away from rockfish and outside of Maryland, you will find fork lengths quite often used for both science and regulatory. I think you tag, Kevin. I might be wrong, but for those of us who tag rockfish on the bay and are part of the CCA tagging program, it's kind of a point of confusion, because the folks in Jersey record all of the information that we send up there as fork length. They assume that we're tagging at fork length because that's the scientific method. When in reality, everyone in Maryland is used to doing the full pinch the tail overall length, because that's how we're judged by the law. So, a little bit of a point of contention, but, is what it is. How about a plug for the importance of joining CCA as the only voice for recreational fishermen on fisheries today? Toby's absolutely right. I'm glad I just got in a mention of the CCA tagging program. And I try and do it whenever we put in the news section about the pickerel tournament, or, they have the invasive species tournament coming up. Not really a tournament, more of a contest, I guess. But it's a pretty cool deal. And it allows you to join CCA and interact with CCA and actually accomplish something for the science community. For you folks who aren't familiar about it, look in the news section in the April edition of Fish Talk. It'll be coming out in like a week, 10 days. It'll be hitting the streets. And we have a segment on it. It's a really neat thing where basically, use your phone, take a picture of the fish, use the app, and you register the invasive species that you're catching, critical details like location, size, and it allows CCA to have this information and kind of know what's going on with the invasives and how many people are catching them. It's a good thing from a science perspective. It's a good thing from your perspective, not only because you're contributing to science and contributing to CCA in the process, you also get your name into the hat for some seriously cool prizes. They have a bank of prizes and awards that you can win. And what they do is every time you give them the science on an invasive fish, your name goes into the hat. So if you catch 10 snakeheads and you put all 10 of them into the system, you get 10 chances to win that week's prize. And it's all good, like really good stuff. A lot of the big companies, make some significant donations of tackle and coolers and all kinds of things to CCA because they want to help support them. And this is how CCA turns it right back into the fishing community. So pretty cool gig. I can't say enough good things about CCA. Absolutely. From Tim, what about the abundance of catfish all year long? Does that affect the change in why so many lately? So Tim, you're stealing my thunder. I got a slide coming up a catfish. Actually, a couple of slides are coming up on catfish. So I'm going to ask you to wait, okay? Hold off till we get to those slides. All right, Chris, what do we got next? What happened to the gray trout and the oh my God. Yeah, so gray trout, some people call them yellowfin trout, some people call them weakfish sea trout. If I knew what happened, I would be master of the world. Knowing, it gets blamed on the netters off North Carolina a lot, and there is a lot of shrimping bycatch of juvenile weakfish. But this was also true years ago, and I will never forget this. When I was 12 years old, I think it was, I caught a 10-pound 6-ounce and 6-pound 10-ounce weakfish in the same day at Gum Thickets. It was like the highlight of my youthful fishing life. And that was back in the early 80s. We had a great run of weakfish in the early 80s. After that run petered out, they completely disappeared until like the mid to late 90s. There was a good 15-year gap between big runs of weakfish. And that run lasted for several years into the early 2000s, just like you say, 2000, 2003. That's about right. They petered out and completely disappeared. Used to be able to go to the Bay Bridge and drop down a tandem rig and catch 8, 10, 12 trout up to 6, 8, 10 pounds like nobody's business. It was a phenomenal fishery. They did go away, and I said for years after that, don't worry, they're going to come back. We've seen this cycle before. I actually found a article from, it was like Sports Afield magazine, that talked about the incredible weakfish fishing in the middle Chesapeake Bay and how big and plentiful they were. And it was from the early 70s, and it was bemoaning their disappearance. So these are definitely cyclical fish. There's no question about it. Hopefully they'll cycle back. Last year, there were actually better numbers caught down the bay and up the bay as far as the chop tank, although most in that area were undersized fish. There were some keepers caught, but they were mostly undersized fish, and certainly not in the numbers, that we used to see. But I do really, the evidence says that these are cyclical fish. The weak fish come and they go. They come and they go. Now, we've been due for them to come back for a solid 5, 6, 8 years. I don't know why they haven't. That's a whole different topic, but hopefully they'll bounce, And the thing is, even way back when, we had those shrimpers. Those shrimpers were out there, having bycatch issues, even back in the 70s, and then again in the 80s, and then again in the 90s. That, was happening then too. So I have a suspicion that we're due for a boom year, and it probably will happen at some point. I certainly hope it does. Where do you think our best bet would be for targeting pompanos in the bay? Well, Todd, that depends on where you are, middle or lower. I'm not going to say upper because they haven't showed up in the upper yet, to my knowledge. But as a general rule of thumb, you can basically target them anywhere you've got good hard structure coming up off the bottom, something like the stone rock, something like a wreck, right? You need something significant like that. You could do it on the live ground southwest of the target ships where the mussel grounds are. Those bumps and lumps. The trick is going to be choosing the right bait, because Pompano, they love sand fleas. Sand fleas are a great bait for them. They will eat other stuff. You might catch one on a bloodworm, you know. But if you specifically want to target them, I would get a hold of some sand fleas, or maybe use some chunks of crab. Crab works good for them sometimes. And you're going to want to put it right on top of that structure. If you've got a wreck in 30 feet, in the middle bay, in the lower bay, you want to literally anchor over that wreck and drop it so that bait is right on the structure. That's going to be, a critical part of it.
Cool. Todd just responded that he's in Southern Maryland. So
Southern Maryland. Okay, so there's a good number of wrecks in the mouth of the Potomac that would offer good potential for this. There's also the reef off Point No Point. I would think that has potential for it. Can't swear that they're there. Haven't done it. But like if I wanted to target them, that's definitely a spot I would consider trying. And again, that live ground off the target ship, that ground holds a lot of fish. Everyone goes down there and they troll for Spanish mackerel, or they troll for cobia, or they sight fish for cobia. It's pretty rare that people actually like sit there and fish bottom rigs and bait on that bottom. But that bottom is full of life. I had someone on the boat last year. We fished it for a little while at anchor while chumming for cobia. And young guy, he got kind of bored and he was like, "Can I drop a bottom rig?" And I was like, "Sure, go for it." And he dropped down a bottom rig baited with bloodworm, and he caught, oh my God, he caught like, in like a couple hours, he caught like a dozen puffer fish, some little sea bass, all kinds of stuff. I don't even remember what else he could, white perch, I think he got all kinds of stuff. So, very, very diverse bunch of critters swimming around down there.
Okay. Patrick.
I've seen large schools of 12 to 14-inch rockfish all over the bay. Does this mean the fishing can be amazing in the next couple? I assume we have years after that, if the next couple of years. Patrick, I wish the answer was yes. And I hate to predict things because I'm always wrong when I try and make a prediction, but I'm going to predict the answer is no. Let's hope I'm wrong. I say that because, man, going back 10 years, there have always been these hordes of little teeny rockfish around. You have to kind of dodge them when you're fishing. I strongly encourage dodging them when you're fishing. Like, it kills me when somebody gets on a school like that and they just catch one after the next, after the next, after the next. If you're on my boat and we have a school of breaking fish and we catch two that are 12 to 14 inches and I can see a lot of 12 to 14 inches breaking there, I'm either going to have someone try a heavy jigging spoon or a heavy jig and get it below the fish, see if they catch anything. If they catch another 12-incher, we're done. We're out of there. Or I might just pull up stakes immediately. Because I don't want to handle all these little fish. You're catching these fish over and over again. It's just not great to put the stress on them. And the truth of the matter is they're around in huge numbers. Natural attrition means they're not all going to grow up to be huge. Will some of them? Yes. I honestly think what happens is when those fish hit what used to be 18 inches and today is 20 inches, they get caught. There's so many of us out there fishing that the number of fish that make it beyond the legal limit just gets lower and lower and lower. Now, that said, I'm going to back up and I'm going to point out the fact that pre-Great Recession, there were more people on boats out there fishing than there are today, which is hard to believe and hard to conceptualize, but look it up. Look up the DNR's numbers. I looked this up not long ago because I had a hard time wrapping my head around it. And in 2006, the DNR sold like 140,000 boat stickers, right? Just licenses for boats to cover everyone on the boat for rockfish. 2 years ago, which were the latest year the numbers were available for, that was like 108,000. So there's actually been a pretty substantial drop off in the numbers of boats out there that are pursuing these fish. And yet, when the minimum size was 18 inches, didn't it seem like every other fish you caught was 17.25 inches? Last year, didn't it seem like you caught an awful lot of 19.5 inch fish? Not nearly as many as were 20.5 inches. We catch them. When the moratorium went out of effect, we had a pile, huge numbers of 32, 34, 36-inch fish, rockfish in the upper bay. Back then, my dad's boat was out of Bodkin. That was what I fished on all the time back then. We'd run over to Pools Island and eel. And when you fish a live eel, you're not catching a 24-inch fish. They don't know what to do with a live eel. You're catching 30-plus inch fish, occasionally a 28. That was what we caught, and we caught them over and over and over again. They all got caught up in 4 or 5 years. And you just don't see those big fall fish anymore. So I wish the answer was yes, but I'm scared it's no.
There you go. One last question before we go back to the slides. From Outdoors Maryland.
I love that logo. When should the bull reds and trout show up around Tangier Sound? Well, so the trout, it's funny. April's a good month for big trout. You don't catch as many, but they're bigger. And then late April into May, you start getting your real numbers. As far as the reds, it's a later deal with the reds. You're usually talking summertime, particularly the bulls, the really big ones. Those fish, that generally doesn't start happening till, you hear guys catch them here and there in July, but it's really more like an August, September thing. Now the puppy drum, they're likely to show up significantly earlier, not as early as the trout. Not as early as a trout, but you can start seeing them in May if we have a good run of them. It's kind of hard. Every year really is different on that. It's hard to predict. It's hard to say. But I used to know guys who would focus their trout fishing during trophy rock season. That's when they were going to the Tangier and really focusing on the trout. Because that was when you would get, the really nice big fish. You wouldn't have the 20 fish days. You wouldn't. But you could get, the 26-inch fish. So
there you go. All right, so let's go back to your slides.
All right, hit me with a slide. Ooh, we're on to the invasive section. This is my lovely wife, who is clearly very happy to be holding up a snakehead so I can take a picture. And she caught this fish. This was on the Quaking River, if I remember right. And the snakehead probably represents one of the biggest changes we've had in our fisheries in generations. I mean, it's just a massive change. Do we want invasives coming into our waters? No, of course not. They generally screw all kinds of things up that we don't even understand until after it happens. However, big however here. The snakehead has created some tremendous fishing opportunities. If you folks watching this haven't gotten in on it yet, I'm telling you, you should. It's very exciting. You can fish topwater. They throw up a tremendous wake as they charge at your lure. They crush it. It's a phenomenal strike. It's a good fight, and they taste great. And you don't have to feel one bit bad about killing them, right? Because the DNR is encouraging you to go out there and kill them. In fact, if you keep one, you have to kill it. You're not allowed to keep it live. You're allowed to catch and release it, okay? But you can't have it in your possession alive. They don't want them spreading out to other waterways, which is a constant issue, and you're constantly hearing about them popping up in more and more places. Now, they're now in the Susquehanna in good numbers. Is this going to affect how many juvenile rockfish survive cruising out of that river and making it into the bay? I don't know. There's a real danger there. Now, they have in the Potomac fisheries, they really don't appear to have made a big dent in any of their populations. They haven't hurt the bass. They haven't hurt the crappie. It seems to be okay on the western side. On the eastern side, in the Blackwater complex, the DNR and the National Wildlife Service did a survey year over year comparing the numbers of different species from last year to, I think the study went back 3 years. I could be wrong, might have been 5 years. Anyway, they found a distinct impact, a very definite impact. White perch were the biggest losers. White perch numbers were way, way, way down. Crappie numbers were also down. Several different species were down. A couple were up, but it was weird. Like gizzard shad was up. I think Atlantic silverside was up. A couple oddballs. But here's the flip side of this coin. The Blackwater always had some areas where it had some depth, some channels, some holes you could go and you could fish, and there'd be fish there. It always had tons and tons and tons of water that was 6 inches to 18 inches deep, that got a gazillion degrees in the summertime when the sun beat down on it. And very little could live there. You had bull minnow living there. Frogs loved it. Turtles loved it. But there was no sport fishery. There was no reason for a recreational angler to go to these areas and fish. Today, you've got tremendous opportunities. You can go out there and throw a badonkadonk or a topwater mouse or a frog or a whatchamahoojie, the ones that spin at the back and make tremendous surface disturbance. I'm blanking on them. Whopper poppers. And you've got this incredible recreational fishery here in these areas that there used to be no fish at all. No sport fish, no recreationally caught fish. So there are two sides to this coin. And people debate it all the time and can get very emotional about whether it's a good thing or a bad thing, and everybody can argue about it. But the bottom line is there are two sides to this coin, and they do have very different effects in different waterways. So again, if you haven't gone snakehead fishing, it's something you should do. Go ahead and take us to the next slide, Chris, if you would. It provides some really cool opportunities. That right there is a heck of a fish to catch on a fly, right? And that's a really cool opportunity for a lot of folks that did not exist in this state, 10, 12 years ago. Today, if you had to say, what's the best trophy snakehead water on the eastern seaboard, you could easily make the argument that Maryland's got it. So that's kind of cool. All right, Chris, go ahead and take us to the next one here. Here's the other invasive we want to talk about, the blue cat. So everybody remembers 3 years ago, 4 years ago, a couple years in a row, we had the rainiest springs ever. It rained and rained and rained and rained and rained. It felt like it was monsoon season in India in the Chesapeake Bay area. That really released the blue cats. They've been in the Western Shore tribs. Of course, the James, that's sort of always been the epicenter of the trophies, the trophy blue cats. They've been in the Rap. They've been in the Potomac. Excuse me. They've been in some other Western Shore tribs. After those rainy springs, that was it. They were everywhere. We were catching them anchored off of Thomas Point, fishing for rockfish. I caught one on a jig, of all things, off Point Lookout, on the east side of Point Lookout, like in the main stem bay. That was 2 years ago. They're out. They're everywhere now. And if you talk to the DNR guys about, which invasive scares them the most, they'll point to the blue cat without hesitation. Go ahead and take me to the next slide, Chris. This is from the Fish for a Cure tournament. We caught, I think it was 810 inches of blue cats in aggregate in a morning of fishing. We didn't even fish for them the whole day. And they now make up the bulk of the biomass of fish in the Potomac River. There are astonishing numbers of these fish in the Potomac right now. There are becoming astonishing numbers of these fish in the Susquehanna. Last year, we were getting reports steadily. Guys were saying, if you're within sight of the Route 95 bridge and you drop the anchor and you put up fish on the bottom, you're going to catch a bazillion blue catfish like that. Again, two sides to this coin. Catfish may not get all the glory, but it's cool to be able to go out and catch these big fish. You can catch them up to 30, 40, 50 pounds in most of the rivers at this point. If you go down to the James, you can catch, they've caught there over 100 pounds. There's probably an over 100 pounder in the Potomac, in the Rappahannock. It's just a matter of someone catching them. And in the Potomac Rap, James, 60, 70 pounders are not crazy catches. They're good catches, obviously. They're great catches, but they're not crazy catches. You can bet that in some matter of time, they're going to be like that in all the trips. These fish just survive and thrive. So, the downside there, again, if they're in the Susquehanna, how many little baby rockfish are going to be eaten by that guy before he gets out to the bay? How many yellow perch are going to be eaten by that guy when they come into spawn? But it's another pretty spectacular fishery that we can all dip into. And before you say anything about, catfish, I'm going to assure you one thing. Excuse me. When you get these fish at the right size, and by that I mean basically 24 to 34 inches, somewhere in there, they're good eating. That's a really good eating fish that Kaylee's holding up right there. That's Kaylee, the editor of Prop Talk. She joined us on that endeavor and caught a ton of fish herself. And that fish she's holding right there is a perfect eating size fish. And you fry them up, those suckers are good. There's nothing wrong with them. So you don't want to take the really, really big ones because they do concentrate. Some of the pollutants can get into them, and there are advisories out on eating the really big ones. So once they get over 36, 38 inches, you really don't want to keep them. But that size right there, that's some good eating. That really is. So it's just another example of a big shift in the fisheries that we have at our disposal, for good and for bad. There are some good shifts and there's some bad shifts. And if there's any one thing that I've definitely seen throughout my lifetime on the bay, it is that the fisheries do change. They do change. Heck, when I was a kid, you couldn't catch a rockfish. We didn't catch rockfish. We caught bluefish. We caught bluefish all the flipping time. And when we did catch a rockfish, we went, oh my God, look, that's the state fish of Maryland. How about that? We caught a rockfish. Woo, that's crazy, right? Didn't happen much at all. The moratorium did fix that. They did come back strong. If you actually look at the ASFMC's population numbers, it was well after the moratorium that the big bounce occurred. The rockfish got opened up, but you look at that population chart, it just goes up and up and up for 6, 7, 8 years. Just a tremendous spike. So it wasn't the moratorium alone. And the regulations that we deal with for better or for worse, they're not a silver bullet. They're not magic. And it's not just us anglers who are either putting a dent in the population or helping that population grow. Of course, we play a role. We play a big role. We got to recognize it. We got to work with it. But no matter what, these fisheries are going to change. That's what they do. They change.
Lenny, we got
any more questions, Chris?
We do. Hold on.
All right. I got to wet my whistle real quick. A little drink. All right, Matthew. Dolphin. Croaker, hardhead. All right. Dolphin. I don't know. When I was a kid, you would see dolphin with some regularity. Once you got down towards the chop tank, heck, you'd see sea turtles. I haven't seen a sea turtle in the bay in a long time. It used to be like every time you went down to the chop tank, you would see a sea turtle pop up. And you'd see dolphins, some regularity. We didn't for some years. They weren't around. And then probably the last 5 years here, they've been not only as far as the chop tank, but heck, up to the bridge, in the Severn, in the west. I don't know what's causing it. I can tell you that it's not huge numbers. When a pod of 20 dolphin gets spotted by 5 different boats through the course of a day, it's all over Facebook. And it's all over. Everybody's shouting and screaming, oh my God, dolphins. It's really not that crazy. And I think maybe it gets a lot more attention than it used to. Now, as for the croaker, that's a totally different story. Back during when we had the good weakfish, we had awesome croaker fishing. I can remember a time when in April, I would go to my buddy's house at Franklin Manor, and we would go out and cast from the shoreline into Herring Bay, bloodworms on bottom rigs. And this is April. And go out there in the evening and catch one after the next 1 to 3 pound croaker. You could go out into any of the rivers and fish in the evening and just load up on the croakers. Prior to that, again, going back to when I was a kid, we didn't see many croakers for a long. There was a long period of time when you did not see many croakers, and when you did catch them, they were like this big. They were really little guys. Now, if you fish for spot to live line this year, you probably noticed there were tons of those little teeny croaker around. They absolutely were around, and they have been. They have been in years past. I don't know why they're not coming back big. Again, the netters get blamed for this a lot. But when we had the good croaker years, those netters were still out there working. It's not like they weren't shrimping off North Carolina. So I don't know what's going on there. Again, I'm not the scientist. It definitely is a change. Hopefully, they'll come back around. Again, I hope that this is a cyclical thing. But again, we're overdue for them. We're overdue for the weak fish. We're overdue for the croaker too. We'll have to see on that one.
We don't really have any questions per se, Letty. Got a lot of cool comments running around.
I'm sure, this is a contentious topic.
Yeah.
It really is. Everybody who's been fishing on the bay for a long time sees these changes, and everyone sees them through a different prism. And if you used to fish above the bridge or and now you fish down at Point Lookout, or vice versa, you used to fish down at Point Lookout, now you fish above the bridge, you're seeing these changes in completely different ways, right? There are guys in Salmons who've been crying for 6-7 years. Where the heck are all the damn rockfish? Why are they all north of the bridge? And when I was much younger, and we used to fish out of Bodkin all the time, we did not have those masses of fish like have happened for the last 5, 6, 7 years. Come, I guess, mid-June, late June through September, north of the bridge has had the best striped bass fishing anywhere. It's kind of bizarre. These fisheries change. They do change. FV Miss Paula, what do you think the huge amount of shrimp in the bay will do? That's an interesting question. That's another fishery that I didn't even think of, but it really is a fishery that's completely changing. All of a sudden, we've got shrimp. Like the crabbers in the Tangier Sound pull up a crab pot, 5 shrimp hop off of it. I don't know what it'll do. I have to think it's got to be a good thing. It's more forage. There have always been the mantis shrimp in the deep waters, but we haven't had these other species of shrimp, at least not to my knowledge, sort of arriving all over the place. I can tell you one thing. I sure want to figure out how I can legally go seine net for them in the Sound and catch myself a bunch, because they're tasty critters. It's got to be a net positive, though, right? Because it's another forage. You'd think, particularly for the specks and the reds, maybe that has something to do with why the specks and the reds are going where they're going. Because if you go down south, heck, that's the main bait for them. Even just going as far south as the mouth of the bay, Virginia. A shrimp under a popping cork, standard fare, right? So I'd have to think it's going to be a good thing.
Cool.
I'd love to catch a pompano near the target ship. Around what time do they show up? Tom, I don't think anybody knows the answer to that question because they hadn't showed up until the last few years. I do know that they've showed up in pound nets off Point Lookout as early as mid-May. I don't know if they have any earlier. It's entirely possible. But that was the first I heard of them. June, I think, is when those catches were made off the shorelines. I don't think mid-May would be too early to try. And look, what's the worst thing that's going to happen if you drop bait down on that live bottom? What's the worst thing that's going to happen? You're going to catch something else, right? The bait's not going to go ignored in those areas. There's a lot of fish down there. So I'd say mid-May, June, give it a shot then.
Mm-hmm. Chuck.
Hey, Chuck. Great to see Chuck's face on there. Do you get a ribbon fish up the bay? The last couple of years, we've seen a lot of them down our way. So interestingly, Chuck, we have not seen them in the numbers you guys have or the sizes, but as far up as in the Patuxent and in the chop tank, yes. Multiple reports came in of the ribbon fish in the chop tank, in the Patuxent, not just in the bay, but actually going up the rivers. One of our contributors, Eric Packard, diehard kayak guy, kayak fishing in the Patuxent in Mill Creek. He was catching ribbon fish last year. Not a ton of them, but he was catching them. And nobody is really targeting them. I think it's mostly accidental catches, which tells you that if you really targeted them, you probably could catch a bunch. Off St. George's Island, a bunch were caught last year. Some were caught by guys who were chumming for rockfish in the chop tank. So heck yeah, that's another very interesting changing fishery. That would have been a good one to include in this. It didn't occur to me. And just for other folks who aren't aware, Chuck is down in the Hampton area. He's at the mouth of the bay. They've had, I don't think he would argue with me saying, pretty incredible fishing for ribbon fish the last few years. They've been showing up in really big numbers. Guys who are targeting them in the inlets at night and also outside of the bay, but close to shore, have just been making some phenomenal catches. So it's pretty cool. Pretty cool.
Patrick wants to know about the blues.
Will we ever see blues again like years gone by? Patrick, I don't know. I'm scared to say I hope so, because back when we had those big monster blues roaming the bay, we did not have the rockfish. So, I'm not sure we want them back. I don't know. Now, they're still around. They're still around. I noticed this when people started saying, oh my God, what happened to all the bluefish? They shifted. And they are now near shore water populations of bluefish that are like what we used to have in the bay. In the bay, even in the upper bay, if you went trolling midsummer, you trolled hoses, you trolled spoons, you'd catch 2, 4, 6, 8-pound bluefish. In the springtime, you get some tide runners, 14, 16-pound bluefish, and every now and again you get a fish over 10 pounds. That would be a nice, really big one. But we had those blues all throughout the bay. Now, we get some snappers. You see a Taylor blue now and again, 2, 3 pounds. Nothing like the numbers that there used to be, and nothing like the sizes that there used to be. But if you go out of Ocean City or go out of the mouth of the bay and you go to a shoal anywhere from 2 to 18, 20 miles from the beach, and you set up a chum line, boy, if you don't have wire leader, you better bring a whole box of hooks, because you're going to catch a lot of bluefish, and you'll get them up to 16, 18, 20-pound fish. They're out there. They're just not coming up the bay the way they used to be. Could be a rockfish thing. Maybe they don't like to compete with rockfish so much. Could be a bait thing. I don't know. Places to fish around Salisbury for red and sea trout from a kayak. Okay. So from Salisbury, excuse me, it's a short hop to the landings in the Tangier and the Pocomoke. You're not far away at all. That's where you want to head. Crisfield would be a great destination for you. That puts you out in the Anamessex River, the Little Anamessex. There is a launch in the Big Anamessex. I think it's called Coburn Creek, although I could be wrong. But if you Google it, you'll find it. I think it's Coburn Creek. In the Pocomoke, I'm blanking right off the top of my head. Maybe Zach or one of our kayak guys can pop in on some of the soft launches. There are a lot of really good soft launches down in those zones. And then, of course, you can also go all the way down to Cape Charles and launch down by the cement ships at Chesapeake, fish those waters. All that entire stretch is really good for reds and sea trout. And if you're launching a yak, a good place to go would also be the Church Creek launch on the Honga. That'll put you into a lot of good territory right there. Those are all prime time. There's a soft launch at the top of the Mannequin River. I'm not sure what it's called, but again, if you Google it, I'm pretty sure you can find that. The DNR has a very helpful map on the website that's an interactive that lets you zoom in and zoom out, and it shows you not only the boat ramps but also the soft launches that the kayak guys can get to, that in some cases the boats can't launch there. You can actually get to some pretty cool places that a regular boat and trailer can't. I don't have the name of it at my fingertips, but if you Google Maryland DNR boat access, it'll pop up pretty quick, and you can find a whole lot of good wooders that way. Do you know where to catch sea robins? Interesting question. Solomons Island or south? So sea robins, I would call a rare catch as far up as Solomons. It does happen. The farther south, the farther down the bay you go, the better your chances are going to be. And I would advise fishing any of the old flounder haunts. Flounder and sea robins, you often get mixed together. I guess they feed in similar ways. They both like going along the bottom. But if I wanted to catch a sea robin near Solomons, the first thing I would do is I would go over the edge directly across the bay where we used to catch a ton of flounder, where it drops from like 14 feet to 20 feet. And then it drops even farther, drops down to 50, 60. But you want to be on that sharp edge. That live bottom where everybody was trolling for cobia last year, I'll bet would be a good place to look for them. Out of Point Lookout, the edges around Cornfield would probably be a good prospect because, again, that was all good flounder territory back in the days when we used to get flounder. We didn't get into flounder. That's another fish that we used to have that, you can catch them this big in a lot of spots now, but not, certainly not like we used to years ago. Fred, I just started talking about that. Yeah. So, hey, excuse me. Last year, if you look for flounder and you drop small jigs, you could catch, all the way up to Eastern Bay. You'd catch them, but they were this big. They were, 8-inch fish. In the chop tank, maybe they were 10, 12 inches. Now, that's been happening for some years now. The big flounder disappeared. You couldn't find any flounder for a while. Then if you really look for them, you can find these little flounder. That's been going on for several years in a row. Here's an interesting thing. Last season was the first year that I can remember in probably a decade where we also started to get reports of keeper flounder showing up with good regularity in the Tangier. We weren't hearing about them in points farther north. But up until then, we really weren't hearing about keeper flounder in the Tangier either. Someone caught one now and again. But it wasn't like, I can go out and target them and put 4 in the box, Last year was. So hopefully that's a sign of a turnaround. And I guarantee you one thing. I guarantee you this. There will be a couple days next year where the rock fishing will be good, and I ain't going rock fishing. I will be going jigging with a 5-inch power bait jerk shad in chartreuse or white, and I will be bouncing that thing dead on the bottom, and I'll be looking for flounder. Will I find them? I don't know. But I can guarantee you I'll go looking for them. Could be a good year for them. Hope so.
And one last question from Chris Gonzalez.
What about false albacore? Have you ever seen them near the bay? Near the bay, yes, but up the bay, no. That is one that I have not. I'm not going to say it isn't going to happen. Never say never. In both of the last 2 seasons, on one occasion last year and on 2 occasions the year before that, I saw flying fish while fishing off of Point Lookout. Absolutely, no question about it. Thought I was crazy until I talked to a buddy of mine who said, the weirdest thing, I could have sworn I saw a flying fish pop out of the water at Point Lookout. And I was like, okay, I'm not nuts. That happened 2 years ago. And then last year I saw one. It happened again. So that's insane. That shouldn't happen. That never happened. Maybe those fish just got lost. I don't know. But if they can come up here, who's to say a false albacore is not going to? It could happen.
All right. Well, I think we've reached the end.
Woo!
I know.
Well, we got a lot of good questions. I'm glad that folks hung in with us after our massive technical disaster.
Seriously.
Thanks for sticking with it, folks.
Yeah, thanks for sticking in there. But we still had a good crowd, and I apologize for that. I'm not sure exactly what happened, but
That wasn't your fault. On my screen, it said Facebook ended this broadcast.
I saw that too.
Yeah, Facebook jumped in. I don't know.
Yeah, I'll have to call Mr. Zuckerberg and say, what the hell?
Yeah, do that, will you please? Chris, straighten him out, okay?
Very good. Well, thanks everybody for joining us. We'll be back next month, the second Thursday of each month, with another Live with Lenny. Lenny.
You betcha. Thanks.